Walter White is a high school chemistry teacher and has a second job at a car wash. During a shift, he faints. At the hospital, he discovers that he has lung cancer with a life expectancy of only 2 years. He doesn't reveal the news to his wife and stops working at the car wash. He goes on a DEA raid led by his brother-in-law, Hank, as an observer, and while they are arresting Emilio, a drug manufacturer, he sees his former student, Jesse Pinkman, secretly escaping. He proposes to Jesse that they cook meth together. With the van and some equipment stolen by Walt from the school lab, they go to the desert and start cooking premium quality meth. Jesse tries to sell the meth to his boss, Crazy 8. The situation degenerates, and they have to kill Jesse's former partner, Emilio, and lock Crazy 8 in Jesse's basement. After some hesitation, Walt kills him. Walter's wife, Skylar, becomes suspicious of him. After a phone call, she tracks Jesse down. Walt tells her he is just a pot dealer. Hank and his partner Gomez find Crazy 8's car in the desert with Walt's meth and one of the gas masks Walt stole from the lab. Walt is amicably questioned. The DEA starts an investigation on Walter's meth, the purest product ever seen. Jesse proposes to Walt that they continue cooking, but Walter refuses. So he tries to cook with his friend Budger. The attempt is a failure. Walt reveals to his family that he has cancer. Skylar wants Walter to start the cure, but he's worried about the cost. She asks for help from Elliot and Gretchen Schwartz, who offer to pay for the treatment. Walt initially refuses, but after a long conversation with the family, he says he will accept the offer. In reality, he goes back to cooking with Jesse. Jesse contacts Tuco Salamanca, Crazy 8's boss, to sell him his meth. Tuco steals it from him and beats him. Walt goes to Tuco with explosives, and presenting himself using the name Heisenberg, he gets compensation for Jesse and a business deal to work together. To satisfy the agreements with Tuco, they steal a barrel of methylamine, which gives their meth a blue color. In a fit of rage, Tuco kills his henchman, No-Dose. Walt and Jesse are afraid that Tuco will kill them too. Walt prepares ricin in order to kill him. Tuco kidnaps Jesse and Walt and takes them to a ramshackle house in the desert where his uncle Hector Salamanca lives. He wants to take them to Mexico and have them cook meth for him. Walt and Jesse try to poison him with ricin, but Hector warns his nephew. Tuco tries to kill them, but Jesse hits him and they start fighting. Walt's family is worried about his disappearance, and Marie tells Hank about Jesse, Walter's pot dealer. Hank tracks down Jesse's car and arrives at the ramshackle house where he kills Tuco. Walt walks naked through a supermarket, pretending to have lost his memory. Jesse is questioned by the police, but they have no proof against him, and they have to release him. Walt has lost Skylar's trust. The money he has left does not cover the medical expenses. Jesse is evicted and finds a new home where he meets Jane, his landlady. They start cooking again. Jesse decides to hire his friends to sell the product. He becomes the new Tuco. Business starts to go well. Gretchen discovers that Walt is lying about the payments. She covers his lie and tells Skylar they can no longer pay the medical bills. Hank gets a promotion after killing Tuco. He gets transferred to a task force in El Paso. Juan Bolsa, one of the bosses of the Mexican cartel, puts the decapitated head of a DEA informant on a turtle with a plastic explosive that kills several agents. Hank, unharmed, returns to Albuquerque. The DEA arrests Budger. Walt and Jesse go into business with a shady lawyer named Saul Goodman, who manages to get Budger released. Walt and Jesse hold a marathon cooking session in the desert. They produce meth valued at over $1 million. Jesse becomes intimate with Jane. Walt and Jesse decide to expand their territory and send Combo to sell in the wrong area. There he is murdered by a boy from a rival gang. Jesse is completely shaken. He drags Jane out of rehab. Budger and Skinny Pete quit, leaving Jesse without a distribution chain. Skylar gets her old job back. Soon she discovers that her boss is evading taxes to keep the company going. Saul puts Walt and Jesse in contact with a professional businessman interested in buying their product. Walt meets Gustavo Fring. He gets a message to deliver all the meth within an hour. Jesse is in bed, stoned, and does not respond to Walt, who rushes to his house. He finds the meth under the sink and manages to take it to the meeting place. Meanwhile, Skylar goes into labor. Walt misses his daughter's birth. The next day, Jesse asks for his half. Walt agrees to give it to him only when he gets clean. Walter Jr. creates a website to collect donations to help his father. Saul hires a hacker to launder the money that Walt has received from donations to the website. Jane blackmails Walt, so he gives Jesse the money. Later, Walt stops by his house to talk to him but finds the two of them passed out in bed. Walt tries to shake Jesse and accidentally hits Jane, causing her to roll over and lay on her back. She starts vomiting and chokes. Walt watches her die. The next morning, Jesse is in shock. He is joined by Mike Ehrmantraut, Saul's private investigator, who cleans the house. Jesse goes to a luxury rehab clinic. Walt's cancer is in remission and he can have the necessary surgery. In a confused state, due to the anesthesia, he tells Skylar that he has 2 cell phones. The operation is successful, but Skylar wants the divorce and wants Walt to leave their house. After Jane's funeral, her father goes back to work at the airport control tower, but he's still shaken and devastated. He causes a plane crash above Albuquerque. Jesse is out of rehab and buys his aunt's house back. Tuco's 2 cousins cross the border and reach Hector, who gives them a name, Walter White. They go to Walt's house to kill him, but are stopped by Gus, who reveals that Hank Schrader is Tuco's killer, and gives them permission to kill a DEA agent. Skylar goes to bed with her boss Ted and tells Walt. Walt signs the divorce papers and leaves the house. He accepts Gustavo's offer, $3 million for 3 months of work. Gus has set up a secret lab hidden under the building of an industrial laundry facility. Gus gives Walt an assistant, Gail Bettaker. Jesse is out of the deal. He's angry and starts cooking alone. He pays a girl with meth at a gas station. Hank tracks the meth to that gas station. He identifies Jesse's RV through the security camera footage. Hank calls Walt to ask him if Jesse had a camper. Walt understands that Hank suspects Jesse. He reaches the RV to destroy it, but Jesse arrives, followed by Hank. Walt and Jesse lock themselves inside the RV, while Hank waits outside for a search warrant. Saul calls Hank, pretending to be someone from the hospital, and tells him that Marie had an accident. Hank leaves the RV, and Jesse and Walt destroy it. Hank is furious. He beats Jesse severely and sends him to the emergency room. Jesse could report him and destroy his career, but Walt suggests that he not do it in exchange for Gail's place in his lab and half of the earnings. Hank gets suspended. He is attacked by the twins in a parking lot, but thanks to an anonymous warning message sent by Gus, he manages to save his life. He is seriously injured. Jesse starts dating Andrea and discovers that her brother Thomas is the one who killed Combo. He's in a gang and works for Gus. Jesse plans to kill the 2 drug dealers who ordered Thomas to kill Combo, but Gus plans a meeting to make peace. He tells Jesse that they will not use children anymore. That night, they murder Thomas. Jesse plans to kill them, but Walt anticipates him and hits them in his car. Jesse runs away. Gus is mad at Walt, but decides to continue working with him and bring Gail back as his assistant. Gail has to learn Walt's meth formula as soon as possible because Walt will be dead soon due to his cancer. Victor kidnaps Walt and takes him to the lab. Walt realizes he is going to be killed, so he calls Jesse and tells him he has to kill Gail to save him. Jesse reaches Gail and shoots him to save Walt. Victor reaches the upset Jesse and takes him to the lab. Gus arrives and, without saying a word, he kills Victor. Jesse and Walt return to work. Skylar meets Saul Goodman to know about his money laundering system and buys the car wash from Bogdan. Hank leaves the hospital and the police give him Gail's notebook. He shows Gail's notebook to Walt to have him explain some chemistry notes. They see an inscription to a certain W.W., which apparently turns out to be the poet Walt Whitman. Mike sees how fragile Jesse's mental situation is and takes him along with him to run errands. Walt gives Jesse the ricin to poison Gus at the first opportunity. Gus is at war with a Mexican cartel that attacks his factories and supply trucks. Hank continues to investigate Gale's murder. He was vegan, but a bag of Los Pollos Hermanos with Gus's fingerprints is found at his house. The DEA calls Gus in for an interrogation. Gus admits that he knew Gale, but only because he was the recipient of one of his scholarships. Hank is not convinced, but his superiors prevent him from investigating Gus. Hank asks Walt for help to place a GPS on Gus's car. Walt warns Gus, so Hank discovers nothing significant. Gus cannot risk being exposed by the cartel attack. They flee to Mexico, pretending to want to make peace. To celebrate this new agreement between Gus and the cartel, they go to Don Eladio's villa, where Hector Salamanca killed Gus's former partner 20 years earlier. After ingesting an antidote, Gus poisons everyone at the villa and returns to New Mexico. They reach Hector Salamanca, and a triumphant Gus announces that he has killed Don Eladio and the last remaining Salamancas. Ted is investigated by the IRS for tax evasion. Skylar was featured in his accounting books, therefore she risks being investigated too. She gives Ted the money to pay his penalty through Saul. Gus leads Walt into the desert and tells him that he's done and that he will solve Hank's problem on his own. Walt tells Skylar they need to leave the city with the help of Saul's man, the Disappearer. They can't cover the cost because she gave most of their money to Ted. He warns the police anonymously. Hank's and Walt's families are put into custody. Walt has Huel, Saul's bodyguard, steal the ricin from Jesse, then he poisons Brock with berries. Jesse thinks it may have been the ricin, so he goes to Walt to kill him, but Walt convinces him that it was a move by Gus to finally get rid of him. He convinces Jesse to kill Gus and discover where he can find him. Walt places a bomb under Hector Salamanca's wheelchair as Hector pretends he wants to talk to the police. Gus goes to the retirement home to kill him, but Hector plays his ring bell, activating the bomb and killing himself and Gus. Walter and Jesse destroy the hidden laboratory. The multinational company Madrigal, the owner of Los Pollos Hermanos, is put under investigation. 9 of Gus's men are arrested. Mike is mad at Walt for destroying Gus's empire, but decides to go into business with him and Jesse to buy the silence of the 9 men that were arrested. Saul finds a new cover to cook meth through Todd and a group of pest control teams that constantly move from one house to another. Walt returns to his home and Skylar is terrified of him and afflicted. At a family party, she tries to commit suicide by throwing herself into the pool and tells Walt that she hopes his cancer comes back. Hank is now the head of the Albuquerque DEA. He interrogates Mike as well as Lydia Quayle, a Madrigal manager who worked with Gus. Lydia asks Mike to have the 9 men killed in prison before they can talk, but he refuses. Hank puts GPS trackers in Madrigal methylamine barrels. They cannot use it anymore to cook, so Lydia provides a solution to find more methylamine and the group robs a train. The robbery is a success, but a boy appears by chance at the scene before the others can intervene and Todd kills him. Walt is indifferent to the death of an innocent child, while Jesse is completely distraught and decides to leave the operation. Even Mike decides to leave because the DEA is watching him closely. They make a deal with Declan, a big drug dealer. Mike and Jesse are paid $5 million each to buy them out, while Walt continues to cook with Todd's help and sells the meth to Declan. Mike refuses to give Walt the names of the 9 men in prison, and Walt kills him. Walt makes a deal with Todd's relatives, a criminal gang, and manages to have 9 men killed in prison. Lydia manages to sell Walt's meth. Months later, Skylar shows Walt all the money that she managed for him, locked safely in a storage unit. He decides to retire. He gives Jesse his $5 million. Skylar brings the children back home and things get back to normal. During a family dinner, Hank goes to the bathroom and finds a book of poetry by Walt Whitman. The dedication reads, "To my other favorite WW," signed G.B. Gale Bettaker. Hank finally understands everything. Walt confronts Hank and tells him to give up the idea of arresting him because the cancer is back and he will soon be dead. Hank beats him. Huell brings Walt his money in barrels that Walt then buries in the desert. Jesse is persuaded by Walt to leave the state and calls Saul's disappearer. Before leaving, he sees that Saul made Huell steal the weed from his pocket. He understands that he also stole the ricin the same way on behalf of Walt, and that it was Walt who poisoned Brock to manipulate him and pit him against Gus. He rushes to Walt's with a tank of gas to set the house on fire, but he is stopped by Hank, who asks him for his help in finding evidence to arrest Walt. Hank questions Huell and realizes that Walt buried his money in the desert. Hank sends Walt a photo of a barrel buried in the desert. Walt thinks they found his money and goes to the desert to check. He's followed by Hank. Walt realizes Hank tricked him and calls Jack to come and help him. In return, he will reveal his meth formula to them. Todd and Jack arrive with their gang and they kill Gomez and Hank. They steal Walt's money and kidnap Jesse, forcing him into slave labor to produce meth. Marie tells Skyler that Walt is about to be arrested. Skyler reveals everything to Walt Jr. To their surprise, Walt comes home telling them to pack and leave. They realize that if he didn't get arrested, it means Hank must be dead. Walter Jr. hits him. Walt leaves his family and calls the disappearer. The disappearer gives him a new identity and hides him in a remote house in New Hampshire. After months of inactivity, during which the case has now been made public, Walt returns to Albuquerque, goes to Elliot and Gretchen's, and delivers $10 million to them, which they will have to hand over to Walter Jr. for his 18th birthday. Jesse is held captive by Jack and his gang, and after an escape attempt, Jack kills Andrea. Walt buys a machine gun from a weapons supplier and sets it up with a mechanism inside his car. He returns to his house to retrieve the ricin he had hidden. He joins Lydia and Todd in a bar and talks them into an agreement. He pours the ricin into Lydia's tea and kills her. Walt reaches Skyler to see his children one last time and say goodbye. He gives her the coordinates to find the bodies of Hank and Gomez. He reaches the headquarters of Jack and Tood's gang. As soon as Jesse arrives, Walt throws himself on Jesse and activates the device in the car that starts shooting at the building, killing Jack and his men. Jesse escapes with Todd's car. Walt is mortally wounded. He enters their laboratory, falling to the ground among the instruments as the police arrive.